In today's episode of Today in World War II, January 23rd, the British nab a huge prize, a Soviet defector, but somehow fail to discover the biggest Soviet spy in their organization. Hungarian fascist troops massacre thousands of Serbs and Jews for partisan activity in Yugoslavia. The British 8th Army captures Tripoli, Libya, finally. Eisenhower approves the five-division front that's going to compose the Normandy invasion and sets the date of invasion of June 1st. In Holland, a British medic wins Victoria Cross. And finally, the Soviets reach the Baltic Sea, cutting off East Prussia and forcing the German Navy to attempt to evacuate as many of their army and their civilians as possible. Let's get started. Okay, so on today's date, let's see here. Sorry about that. Lost my place. On today's date, on January 23rd, 1940, as I mentioned in the introduction, MI5, which was the British Secret Service that was designed for counter espionage, they were able to entice a NKVD or KGB defector. His name was Walter Krivitsky. He switched sides, defected to the Brits, and they were debriefing him. And he described a network of Soviet agents, of over 100 Soviet agents all over working in Europe, including 16 of them who were British subjects. Now, what's interesting is that he knew of the leader of the biggest, the Soviets had five agents they had turned in the 30s. And Kim Philby was the leader. There was like four other ones besides him. They weren't discovered by the Brits until the early 60s. So it was a disastrous failure on their part because the Soviets had penetrated them so poorly and no, not poorly, so amazingly well from a spy point of view that there were no secrets in Britain because the Soviets were getting access to almost everything. So Kim Philby was the main one, and he was already burrowing his way very deep and very high in the intelligence organization of Great Britain. They didn't catch him. They had him. They had his name right there. But they had one officer attached to this, just one, and he missed it. Wow. Lot of agents died later because because the information was turned over by Philby to the Soviets and those agents died because of that. So wow, Whew. The Brits were so good in their counterintelligence and their intelligence operations against the Germans, and yet they didn't do well against the Soviets. There was a blind spot there. But there's no blind spot for you because you see the utter necessity of clicking that subscribe button and clicking the bell that allows you to get notified when when I drop another video on YouTube. It's just a very elementary thing. We're not asking you to find a spy in your intelligence organization that's going to be feeding information to the Soviets, right? All you got to do is just do that and you'll be good. So please do me a solid. Thanks. On January 23rd, 1942, in Yugoslavia, there were about 2,400 Serb civilians who were massacred by Hungarian troops and about 700 Jews. The pretext was it was in retaliation for partisan activity. These are war crimes, okay? In the International War Crimes Court says that if you take innocent civilians and you kill them because of something else that had happened, that's a war crime. Um, Notice there was Hungarian troops. Okay, so the Hungarians were lockstep right with the Germans, the Nazis. So were the Bulgarians. So were the Romanians. Now they all switched sides later when their goose was already cooked. But just understand that for most of the war, they were on the side of the Axis. And it wasn't just, hey, they had divisions that were fighting in the Eastern Front, which they did, but they also had quite a few that were, taking on the partisans in occupied territory, and they were just as vicious, just as brutal, if not more in some cases, than the SS and the Germans. So don't think of Hungary as the victim in World War II because they weren't. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right. But I don't want you to be a victim. So don't be a victim. And the way to not be a victim is to click the like button on this video and leave a comment because that's you taking your power back. Don't give in to the man, the algorithm. You help me and I help you. Thanks a lot. On January 23rd, 1943, the British 8th Army captured Tripoli, Libya. And let me tell you something. Uh, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the North African campaign started in 1940 when the Italians invaded Egypt, and then it escalated. That's these things tend to escalate. The story. Rommel came in and they had to rescue the Italians. Were getting their butts handed to them, and it went back and forth. And this was the last round because in 42, the Montgomery and the Eighth Army they had defeated the Germans twice, the Battle of El Alamein, and then this was the last push to get them out of North Africa, driving them into Tunisia. Meanwhile, the North African landings had taken place, Operation Torch. The Americans and the British had landed in French North Africa. So the Germans were being pushed into Tunisia in a vice they would later be, destroyed, evacuated, or taken prisoner. So this was the I should say, yeah, the eastern vice the eastern side of the vice pushing them slowly together. And this is the Eighth Army captured Tripoli, which they would have loved to have got there before, but they couldn't because there was too much back and forth, too much opposition from the Germans. But this time that was it, pushed them out completely. On this date, on January 23rd, 1944, Eisenhower approved the invasion plan for Normandy, which would consist of five division fronts. In the original invasion, you would have Utah. The American side would be Utah and Omaha Beach. Then you would have Gold, Silver, and Juneau on the British side. And he approved this. He set the date for June 1st. But as we know, and we'll cover this in our series pretty soon. Obviously, we're in January now. That'll be in June. But bad weather caused Eisenhower to delay to postpone the invasion a couple times, and it didn't actually happen until June, 5th for the airborne, 6th for the seaborne invaders. Uh, on January 23rd, 1945, a British medic in Holland who was attached to the commandos won a Victoria Cross for his heroism in the face of the enemy. He was a medic. He didn't carry a rifle, but there were three wounded men under fire, and he sprinted 100 yards to take care of them. He put one on his back and carried him back to safety, even though he was hit. And in that endeavor, he still went back and tried to take another one. So he got back another 100 yards. Think it was 100 yards there, took care of them under fire, put one on his back, got him 100 yards back to the British lines, runs under fire another 100 yards to the other two wounded soldiers, commandos, puts one in his back, the second one, and brings him back. But this time, he was shot and killed, and for his bravery, deservedly so, he won the Victoria Cross, which is the highest uh, medal that the British have for valor under fire. And finally, on January 23rd, 1945, the Soviet Union cut off East Prussia and the German troops there and all the civilians. You have to remember something about this. East Prussia was German territory. It'd been there for a lot, centuries. So it wasn't like this was just occupied territory. This was Germany. It was the very first time that German territory had been cut off and was going to be conquered. And let me tell you something. There was an awful lot of civilians that were desperate to get out, and they knew what was going on because let me tell you something. If you were a woman in in that was in the way of the invading Soviet army in World War II, you were going to get raped. And they knew that was coming and they were desperate to get out. So the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, did their best to load up as many people as they could on ships to get evacuate them into Germany proper before the encirclement finally the pincers came and they crushed all the resistance. And they did get a lot of them out, but there was an awful lot of them who got sank by subs on those ships as they were trying to get out. And we'll cover that later as we get more into our video series here. But I want to thank you for watching me today. I appreciate it, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow.